There is a food in your refrigerator right now that costs less than $2, that your grandmother ate, that your parents ate, that you have probably eaten hundreds of times in your life without thinking twice about it. And depending on 5 very specific decisions you make around it every single morning, that food is either quietly pulling your blood sugar down toward a safer range or silently pushing it higher than your medication can compensate for. And the part that stops my patients cold when I explain this to them is that most of those decisions have nothing to do with whether you eat this food at all. They have everything to do with how you eat it, when you eat it, what you cook it in, and what you put beside it on the plate. Get those decisions right, and I have watched fasting glucose numbers drop by 20, 30, sometimes 40 points over a matter of weeks without a single medication change. Get them wrong, and you can eat this food every single morning for years and never see your numbers move. I have seen both outcomes in my own clinic, in patients who were genuinely trying, patients who thought they were already doing the right thing. The food is eggs, and if you have type 2 diabetes, or you have been told your blood sugar is running too high, what I am about to share with you may be the most practically useful thing you hear all year. My name is Dr. Pablo. I am a board-certified geriatrician with 18 years of clinical experience, working specifically with adults over 60 on metabolic and cardiovascular health. And today I want to have a completely honest conversation with you about eggs and blood sugar, not the version built on outdated nutritional fears from 30 years ago that caused an entire generation of people with diabetes to quietly remove one of their most powerful breakfast tools, but the version grounded in current clinical evidence and in what I have personally witnessed change real numbers in real people sitting across from me in my examination room. I also want to tell you before we go any further that I am saving something for later in this video. A concept that almost never appears in conversations about eggs and diabetes, something involving your body's natural hormone behavior in the early morning hours before you even open your eyes. And when you understand how that hormonal cycle interacts with what you eat for breakfast, the way you approach your morning meal will never be quite the same again. Stay with me for that, because it is the single most important point I will make today, and I will tell you right now that it sits at number 1 on this list for a reason. But let us start at the foundation, because everything else I say today depends on you understanding what is actually happening inside the aging body when blood sugar stops behaving the way it should. In type 2 diabetes, and this is the part that rarely gets explained properly, the central problem for most people is not that the pancreas has stopped making insulin. In fact, in the early and middle stages of this disease, many patients are producing a normal amount of insulin, or in some cases, more than normal. The pancreas is working overtime, pushing harder and harder to compensate. The deeper problem is that the cells in your muscles, your liver, and your fat tissue have lost their sensitivity to insulin's signal. Insulin is the key that unlocks your cells and allows glucose to move out of the bloodstream and into the tissue where it can be used for energy. In insulin resistance, those locks have become stiff. The key is still there. Insulin is still being produced, but the door will not open the way it should, and glucose accumulates in the blood. Now here is what this has to do with eggs specifically. Research published in the Journal of Nutrition has shown that the ratio of protein to carbohydrates in your first meal of the day has a direct and measurable effect on how sensitive or how resistant your cells remain to insulin throughout the entire rest of that day, not just for the hour after breakfast, for hours afterward. The first meal sets a metabolic tone that your body follows, and eggs, when handled correctly, set that tone in a way that almost no other common breakfast food can replicate. 2 large eggs contain approximately 12 to 13 grams of complete, high-quality protein. Complete meaning all 9 essential amino acids are present, the ones your body cannot manufacture on its own and must obtain from food. The glycemic index of eggs is essentially 0. Eaten correctly, they do not raise blood glucose by a meaningful amount on their own. But the mechanisms run deeper than that. The amino acid leucine, which eggs contain in significant concentration, has been shown to stimulate insulin release from pancreatic beta cells in a more calibrated, proportionate way, making your body's insulin response more precise rather than chaotic. On top of that, the protein content of eggs slows gastric emptying, meaning food moves out of your stomach and into your small intestine more gradually. When glucose from any carbohydrates in your meal enters the bloodstream slowly, rather than in a sudden concentrated surge, you avoid what researchers call the postprandial spike, that sharp rise in blood sugar after eating that damages blood vessel walls, promotes arterial inflammation, and over years and decades drives the complications that every person with diabetes is working to prevent. Now I want to address something I know is sitting in the back of some of your minds, because I hear it regularly in my clinic. You were told, possibly by a physician, possibly quite a few years ago, that eggs were dangerous for your heart because of their cholesterol content. And if you have diabetes, which already carries an elevated cardiovascular risk, you took that warning seriously. You removed eggs from your breakfast. You replaced them with oatmeal and fruit. You thought you were making the responsible choice. I want to be precise here because you were not wrong to take medical advice seriously. That is exactly what you should do. But the science has shifted substantially since that guidance was widespread. A major review published in the BMJ concluded that for the vast majority of healthy adults, dietary cholesterol, the cholesterol found in foods, has a far smaller effect on blood LDL levels than previously believed. The primary drivers of harmful LDL are refined carbohydrates, added sugars, and trans fats. A 2024 analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that regular whole egg consumption was associated with improved HDL cholesterol function, specifically the ability of your good cholesterol to actively remove harmful cholesterol deposits from arterial walls, a process called reverse cholesterol transport. For someone managing both diabetes and cardiovascular risk simultaneously, that is a finding worth knowing. The egg you stopped eating may have been one of the better decisions on your plate all along. The problem was never the egg. In most cases, the problem was everything surrounding it. And that is exactly where I want to focus now, because this is where the clinical reality lives. Eggs protect your blood sugar only when you make the right decisions around them. And there are 5 decisions in particular that determine everything. I have watched patients eat eggs every single morning for years and still run fasting numbers above 160 because 3 of these 5 decisions were wrong. So let us go through them carefully, starting with number 5. And building toward that number 1 point I promised you, the one about your morning hormones, because that is the decision with the highest stakes of all. Number 5 is how you cook them, and the mechanism here matters more than most people realize. Egg yolks already contain their own natural fat, a fat that is structurally incorporated into the egg itself and that your body processes efficiently. When you add butter to the pan or fry your eggs in oil at high heat, you are introducing an additional fat load that in the context of diabetes can temporarily worsen insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. Saturated fat, in particular, has been shown in research from diabetes care to interfere with insulin signaling pathways in muscle cells, making the already stiff locks of insulin resistance even harder to turn. A non-stick pan over medium-low heat is genuinely all you need. 2 eggs beaten and poured into a dry non-stick pan will produce soft, creamy scrambled eggs in 2 to 3 minutes with nothing added. Boiled eggs are equally effective and far more practical for busy mornings. Hard-boil 6 eggs on a Sunday evening, refrigerate them, and you have a ready breakfast for most of the week that requires no cooking at all. Poached eggs, cooked in gently simmering water with a small splash of white vinegar to help the whites hold together, are an excellent option as well. What you want to eliminate is the high-heat fry in butter or even in olive oil. I say even olive oil deliberately because I know many of you use it and trust it, and it is genuinely a healthful food. But olive oil's beneficial compounds are most active at low temperatures or consumed cold. When heated to frying temperatures, those compounds degrade, and what remains is an added fat load that is not serving your morning blood sugar goals. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Dorothea. She was 71 years old, a retired school librarian from North Carolina, sharp and organized, and genuinely committed to managing her diabetes well. She had been eating 2 eggs every morning for over a year because her daughter had read that protein was good for blood sugar and had encouraged her to make the switch. But Dorothea's fasting glucose had remained stubbornly between 158 and 172, and her most recent A1C had come back at 8.1%. When I asked her to describe exactly how she prepared her eggs, she said she fried them in butter because that was how she had always cooked them, and she served them alongside a corn tortilla that she warmed in the same pan, with a small glass of pineapple juice that she had been told was natural and therefore acceptable for a diabetic diet. Dorothea was eating eggs, but the butter, the corn tortilla, and especially that pineapple juice, which contains approximately 32 grams of sugar per cup with virtually no fiber to slow absorption, were producing a blood sugar event every single morning before 8 o'clock. We changed the cooking method to dry scrambled, removed the tortilla and juice entirely, and replaced them with half an avocado and sautéed spinach. Same medications, same everything else. At her follow-up 3 weeks later, her post-breakfast glucose reading had dropped from an average of 196 to an average of 139. She told me she had not seen numbers that low after breakfast in 4 years. Number 4 is what you pair with your eggs, and this is where people unknowingly dismantle every benefit the egg was providing. The single best companion for eggs in a diabetes-conscious breakfast is half a ripe avocado. The reason is specific and grounded in mechanism. Avocado contains monounsaturated fat, the same category of fat that makes olive oil beneficial. And this type of fat slows gastric emptying and reduces the overall glycemic impact of the meal. Half a ripe avocado also delivers approximately 7 grams of dietary fiber, which further buffers glucose absorption. The combination of egg protein and avocado fat produces what metabolic researchers describe as sustained satiety, genuine fullness that lasts for hours, without triggering an insulin surge. You do not spike, you do not crash at 10:30 in the morning, reaching desperately for something sweet. Your blood sugar curve stays relatively flat, and that flatness over time is what allows your A1C to come down. Spinach is your next most valuable pairing, and I want to give you a precise clinical reason rather than a vague endorsement. Spinach is among the richest dietary sources of magnesium available, and research published in Diabetes and Metabolism has consistently found that adults with type 2 diabetes tend to have significantly lower circulating magnesium levels than those without the disease. Low magnesium is directly associated with impaired insulin sensitivity. It is one of the less discussed but clinically meaningful factors in why blood sugar control can remain difficult even when other habits are good. A generous handful of sautéed spinach alongside your eggs is one of the most efficient ways to address that deficiency at breakfast. Tomatoes, bell peppers, mushrooms, and onions are all excellent additions as well. Low in carbohydrate, high in fiber and micronutrients, they increase the nutritional density and physical volume of the meal without meaningfully affecting blood glucose. What you want to eliminate from the plate beside your eggs: white bread or toast, flour tortillas, sweet biscuits, hash browns in any form, sugary condiments including most commercial ketchups, juice of any kind including freshly squeezed orange juice, and processed breakfast meats like bacon or sausage. These pairings are so habitual, so deeply embedded in what we think of as a normal egg breakfast, that most people do not experience them as choices at all. They feel like the natural accompaniments, but every one of them either delivers a direct glucose load or contributes an inflammatory fat and sodium burden that works directly against your metabolic goals. Number 3 is portion timing within the meal itself, and this is a detail so small that almost no one discusses it, but that my patients consistently report makes a noticeable difference in their post-meal readings. If you are eating eggs alongside anything that contains even a modest carbohydrate load, a small piece of whole grain toast, a serving of berries, a half cup of steel-cut oats, the sequence in which you eat those foods matters. Research from Cornell University and replicated in the journal Diabetes Care has demonstrated that eating protein and fat before carbohydrates in the same meal produces significantly lower post-meal glucose spikes than eating the carbohydrates first or eating everything simultaneously. The protein and fat consumed first begin slowing gastric emptying before the carbohydrates even arrive in the stomach. The glucose from those carbohydrates then enters the bloodstream more gradually. Eat your eggs first. Eat your avocado and vegetables. Then, if you are going to include anything starchy, eat that last. I had a patient named Raymond, 64 years old, a former high school football coach from Georgia, who had managed his type 2 diabetes with oral medication for 6 years. Raymond was already eating eggs and had already cleaned up most of his pairings, but he was still seeing post-breakfast spikes into the 170s. When I asked him how he structured his meal, he told me he always started with his toast because he liked to eat it while it was warm, then moved on to his eggs and vegetables. We reversed the sequence. Eggs and vegetables first, the small piece of whole grain bread last. 2 weeks later, his post-breakfast peak had dropped by an average of 22 points. Same food, same amounts, different order. Raymond told me that felt like finding a cheat code he did not know existed. It was not a cheat code. It was physiology. Now, before I move into number 2 and number 1, I want to pause here for a moment. If you are watching this and finding that it is giving you a clearer picture of what is happening in your own body, write your age and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. I read through those comments and it genuinely helps me understand who this community is and what you need from me. Tell me where you are. I want to know. Number 2 is about the yolk, and I need to address this directly because there is a generation of people over 60 who were told to throw it away. The egg white omelet became the symbol of responsible eating for anyone with a heart condition or diabetes, and I understand why that guidance spread. It came from the same cholesterol fears I addressed earlier. But discarding the yolk means discarding the most nutritionally dense part of the egg, and for adults over 60 managing diabetes, that is a meaningful loss. The yolk contains choline, a nutrient essential for liver function and for the integrity of cell membranes throughout the body, and your liver's ability to regulate overnight glucose release, something I will explain in detail in a moment, depends partly on adequate choline intake. The yolk contains vitamin D, and this matters enormously for blood sugar because vitamin D receptors are present on pancreatic beta cells, the very cells responsible for producing insulin. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that vitamin D deficiency is significantly more common in adults with type 2 diabetes and is independently associated with poorer glycemic control. The yolk also contains lutein and zeaxanthin for retinal protection, critical for diabetics who face elevated risk of diabetic retinopathy, and B vitamins including B12 and folate that support nerve function at a time when diabetic peripheral neuropathy is a genuine and serious concern. Throwing away the yolk to protect yourself from diabetes complications is, in a very real clinical sense, removing some of the nutrients that help your body defend against those exact complications. Eat the whole egg. I want to tell you about a patient named Carol, 73 years old, a retired pediatric nurse from Minnesota, who had spent 3 decades advising parents on healthy eating and who applied that same disciplined knowledge to her own diet after her diabetes diagnosis at 68. Carol was meticulous. She ate egg white omelets every morning, prepared without oil, paired with vegetables, timed appropriately. By every external measure, she was doing everything right. But her vitamin D level, when I ran a comprehensive metabolic panel, came back at 18 nanograms per milliliter, significantly below the 30 to 50 range we aim for in diabetic patients. Her B12 was borderline low despite the fact that she was not vegetarian, because she had been systematically removing the part of her breakfast that would have contributed meaningfully to both. Once we reintroduced whole eggs and added a physician-supervised vitamin D supplement, her insulin sensitivity markers began improving over the following 3 months. Her A1C dropped from 7.6% to 7.1% over 2 clinic visits. Carol told me afterward that she felt somewhat betrayed, not by anyone in particular, but by how long outdated nutritional advice had quietly worked against her despite her best efforts. That feeling is more common in my clinic than I can adequately express, and it is exactly why I make these videos. And now we arrive at number 1, the point I told you about at the beginning of this video, the concept that sits at the top of this list because it connects everything else, the cooking method, the pairings, the timing, the whole egg, into a single coherent strategy that addresses the specific biological reality of the aging diabetic body in the morning hours. It is called the dawn phenomenon, and if you monitor your blood sugar at home, there is a real chance you have already noticed its effects without knowing what you were looking at. Here is what happens. In the hours before you wake, typically between 3 and 6 in the morning, your body begins preparing itself for the demands of the coming day by releasing a coordinated wave of hormones. Cortisol rises, growth hormone pulses, glucagon is secreted. These hormones serve a purpose. They mobilize energy, they increase alertness, they prepare your muscles and your brain for activity. One of their collective effects is to signal the liver to begin releasing stored glucose, glycogen, into the bloodstream. This is called hepatic glucose output, and it happens every morning in every human body. In a person without diabetes, the pancreas simply responds with a proportionate insulin release, and the blood sugar is quietly managed without incident. The person wakes up, their fasting glucose is normal, They never think about it. In a person with type 2 diabetes, this early morning glucose release from the liver combines with the underlying insulin resistance of the cells, and the result is that fasting blood sugar is often significantly higher first thing in the morning than it was at midnight. Many patients tell me their numbers are actually worse after a full night of sleep than they were before bed. This is not a mystery, and it is not a sign that their medications are failing. It is the dawn phenomenon operating in a body that cannot efficiently suppress that hepatic glucose output the way a non-diabetic body can. Now here is the connection that changes everything. What you eat for breakfast in the window immediately following that hormonal surge either amplifies the damage or dampens it significantly. A high carbohydrate breakfast, oatmeal, toast, fruit juice, a muffin, even the well-intentioned steel-cut oatmeal with honey that so many of my patients describe with quiet pride, lands on top of that already elevated morning glucose like a second wave. Your liver has already delivered a glucose load. Now, your breakfast delivers another one simultaneously, and your insulin-resistant cells are struggling to manage both at once. Blood sugar climbs steeply. The pancreas strains to compensate, and that inflammatory surge sets a dysregulated metabolic tone that can persist for hours into the afternoon. A high-protein breakfast, 2 whole eggs cooked correctly, paired with avocado and non-starchy vegetables, sends a fundamentally different signal. The protein feeds your muscles without triggering a meaningful glucose rise. The leucine and other amino acids stimulate a proportionate, calibrated insulin response. The fat from the yolk and the avocado blunts the cortisol-driven inflammatory response. And critically, eating protein in the morning has been shown in research from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition to reduce hepatic glucose output later in the day, meaning the liver, after a protein-rich morning meal, is less inclined to over-release glucose in subsequent hours. The practical implication of all of this is one of the most specific and actionable pieces of advice I give my patients, and I want you to hear it clearly. Eat your eggs within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. Do not wait. Do not drink coffee for 90 minutes and then think about breakfast. Do not let that cortisol window run unchecked while your liver continues releasing glucose into an already elevated fasting blood sugar with no protein signal to moderate the response. Within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, get protein into your body. 2 whole eggs, cooked without added fat, paired with half an avocado and a generous portion of non-starchy vegetables. That is the meal. That is the timing. And that combination, in that window, addresses the dawn phenomenon more directly and more practically than any other single dietary adjustment I know of. I want to tell you about a patient named Franklin, 69 years old, a retired civil engineer from Arizona, who had lived with type 2 diabetes for 11 years and whose morning numbers had become the source of genuine daily frustration. His fasting glucose was consistently between 152 and 171, and he had been through 3 different medication adjustments in 2 years, trying to bring it down. Franklin was not eating poorly by any conventional measure. He ate reasonably balanced lunches and dinners. He walked 30 minutes most mornings, but he was skipping breakfast entirely until around 10 o'clock because he was not hungry when he first woke up, and he had read somewhere that intermittent fasting could help blood sugar. What he did not understand was that for a person with active insulin resistance and a pronounced dawn phenomenon, skipping the early morning protein window was allowing that cortisol-driven hepatic glucose release to go completely unaddressed for nearly 4 hours. His liver was releasing glucose from 3 in the morning onward, and there was nothing in his system to moderate it until he finally ate at 10. We did not change his lunch. We did not change his dinner. We did not change his medications or his walking routine. We simply introduced 2 whole eggs with avocado and spinach within 45 minutes of waking. After 4 weeks, his average fasting glucose had dropped from 163 to 138. After 3 months, it was averaging 129. His physician, at his next quarterly visit, reduced one of his oral medications for the first time in 6 years. Franklin sent me a message afterward that I still think about. He wrote, "I spent 11 years believing this was a medication problem. It was a breakfast problem the whole time. Now let me give you the practical plan, specific, time-stamped, and ready to begin tomorrow morning. When you wake up, set a 30-minute window in your mind. That is your target for having protein in your system. While you are still in that first 30 minutes, prepare 2 whole eggs. If you hard-boiled a batch the night before, you are already done. Peel 2, Slice them, set them on a plate. If you are scrambling them fresh, a dry, non-stick pan on medium-low heat, 2 minutes, no oil, no butter. Add half a ripe avocado sliced alongside. Add a generous handful of spinach, sautéed in 30 seconds in the same dry pan, or raw if you prefer. Add sliced tomatoes or any non-starchy vegetable you enjoy. Drink water. Drink unsweetened black coffee or herbal tea if you wish. That is your breakfast. If you feel you need something more, and you want to include a small carbohydrate, a single slice of dense whole grain bread with visible seeds is acceptable, but eat it after the eggs and vegetables, not before or during.